The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The Philadelphia Eagles officially named Kevin Patullo as the new offensive coordinator.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast.
The Philadelphia Eagles have their new offensive coordinator. It is Kevin Patullo, who will replace Kellen Moore in 2025. An internal promotion that was clearly a Nick Sirianni-led decision. Patullo was the Eagles' pass game specialist, pass game coordinator in 2024. Deserves a lot of credit for helping mesh the two philosophies of Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore to create the offense that won the Eagles Super Bowl 59. I like it from a perspective of it brings continuity to a situation that's had little of it. Jalen Hurts, this is going to be his sixth play caller since he's been the Eagles' starting quarterback, or at least since he's been drafted in 2020. So from that perspective, I do like it. But for me, I would have preferred an outside hire, maybe somebody with play calling experience. I do think just bringing in a fresh set of eyes every single year when you do lose your coordinator is a good idea, because then you bring in fresh ideas and it's not stale. And I think internal promotions in the past, they just haven't worked with the Eagles. Like Doug Peterson promoting Mike Groh after Frank Reich left for the Colts. It did not work. Nick Sirianni promoting Brian Johnson after Shane Steichen left in 2023. It did not work. So Kevin Patullo, again, did a really good job of combining both offenses last year. He's Nick Sirianni's right-hand man. The team loves him, like the players have his back, the coaches as well. This was a move that I think most people did sign off on. And he is somebody that's been rising through the ranks in Philadelphia. But for me, I don't love the move based on the history of internal promotions, the fact that he has never called plays before, and just I like the options that were out there. I really liked the idea of a Gerard Johnson or a Josh McCown or somebody from an LA Rams Sean McVay coaching tree just to bring in new ideas, somebody with some play calling experience. That's what I would have preferred, and I think it's what Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie normally prefer as well. It's why they kind of forced Sirianni's hand, I think, last year in hiring Kellen Moore. But it does look like this time around, those two kind of let Nick Sirianni pick. He won the Super Bowl. He deserves the right and the benefit of the doubt to choose his coaching staff. And it is interesting, though. It's a delicate situation that we have faced before in Philadelphia, and it's led to some turmoil, to some power struggles, to some end of eras. Like, this is very similar to what happened with Doug Peterson, because when a head coach comes into Philadelphia, they have to kind of be okay with a unique power dynamic where the GM and owner, they have their hands on everything, more than other teams' owners and general managers. Like, they have say at times in things that normally should be up to the coach, like who's going to be the offensive coordinator? Who's going to be the defensive coordinator? Yes, Nick Sirianni, I'm sure, had a lot of say in bringing in last year Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. Like, he deserves credit for those hires, but we know Vic Fangio was Howie's guy. Like, we know Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman wanted Nick Sirianni to bring in an outside voice to help with a stale offense in 2023 that Jalen Hurts was not okay with. So that's normally been the power dynamic in Philadelphia, but when a head coach gets more success, wins championships like Doug Peterson did, like Nick Sirianni did, eventually they get more power and want more power. And that's clearly what happened with Doug. They allowed him to pick his coordinators after Super Bowl 52. He went with Mike Groh, and then, of course, had Press Taylor being a big voice in that locker room for 3 years. They let Nick Sirianni pick this time as well, with Kevin Patullo. But remember what happened. Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, like, they loosened the leash on Doug. They said, you won the championship, you deserve to pick this next guy. It didn't work. And so what did Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie do? They tightened the leash again. They said in 2020, here's some more cooks in the kitchen. Here's Marty Morningweg. Here's, I can't remember the coach's name from the Shanahan coaching tree over in San Francisco. Here's a bunch of guys mix all of this together because we're not okay with your stale offense. Doug went along with it for one more year, and then he wasn't okay with it anymore. He said, I'm not putting up with this power dynamic. I've earned more, and we're done. And Doug Peterson was fired. Not saying that same thing's going to happen this time around with Nick Sirianni, but it's very important that they do get this right, that Kevin Patullo is a good play caller, is a good offensive coordinator, that this offense does not regress like it did after the previous Super Bowl, like they did after Super Bowl 52. Because, and I'm not saying it could lead to the offense being terrible next year and it could lead to the downfall of Jalen Hurts. Like, there's just too much talent on this offense for them to regress to that level. But if it doesn't work to the satisfaction of the top of this organization, and Nick Sirianni now, like, wants more power, that's where, like, this is delicate. Like, this needs to work, because if they ever want to get their hands on this again like they did last year and like they have in the past with other coaches, like, this is when it could get messy. So this is a very important decision that Nick Sirianni made. And I'm not saying that Howie and Jeffrey were just completely against bringing in Patullo as the OC or promoting him from within. But I do think, like, this is Nick Sirianni's guy. Patullo has been with him since the start, since 2021. I think the internal promotion screams head coach, just like it did with Doug Peterson. So this is a very, very important move that can help keep the peace of the current power dynamic the Eagles have. Because if it doesn't go well, we saw how messy it got with Doug Peterson. We saw in 2023 how messy it got, where who knows if it was Sirianni's choice or Howie's choice to fire Desai during the year, bring in Matt Patricia, who was Howie Roseman's guy. Like, it's gotten messy before. And we know this owner and GM have a history of power struggles with head coaches. Even before Doug Peterson, this happened with Chip Kelly. So Nick Sirianni now has the resume, has the legacy with the ring. I'm very curious. He got the power here. Very curious to see how this one goes. And in the future, if it doesn't work out, how the big three, the head coach, the GM, and the owner, how they will go about that situation. It's very interesting. The past has told us this internal promotion doesn't always go well, and it could lead to more. But at the same time, I'm not trying to say I think a collapse is coming next year again, that Kevin Patullo can't do it just because he hasn't called plays. Like, this offense is so talented, and he did do a really good job last year of combining the best of Nick Sirianni's offense and the best of Kellen Moore's to help kind of marry those two. And so I think Patullo does deserve some credit in that, just like Sirianni and Kellen Moore do. But again, for me personally, I would have preferred the outside hire, a young up-and-coming coach like a Josh McCown or a Gerard Johnson, someone that played the position, maybe somebody that's called plays in the past, although there weren't a lot of great options out there in that way. Like, I was not a fan of the Frank Reich idea. So compared to that, or like Mike McCoy, I'm not in on that. I would prefer Kevin Patullo. But, like, in a broader spectrum, like in a vacuum, I like the idea of bringing in fresh ideas every single year when you do lose your offensive coordinator. But I understand it from a continuity perspective. Jalen Hurts has gone through a lot of change on offense, not just in Philadelphia for 6 years, but he has had a different coordinator, a different play caller, literally every year of his career, going back to Alabama and Oklahoma. So from that perspective, again, I do wish it was an outside hire, but I understand why they said maybe continuity trumps everything. And Patullo does deserve a chance here because he did a really good job helping these two different offenses last year mesh into what was a Super Bowl winning offense. So we'll see how it goes. Very interesting to monitor this situation, though, in the future, because it hasn't always gone well in Philadelphia. And the assistant coaching position sometimes has affected that power dynamic with the big three. And I'm not saying it's going to get messy, but this is more important than you think. Like, they got to make sure that Nick's got to make sure that this is right. Philadelphia should want that for sure.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. Imagine going to the big game this Sunday. That's what a lot of the people around me here on Radio Row are going to do, and the fans who are coming to New Orleans. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have time searching. Inspiration makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and take the work on tickets Gametime. Download Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time.
The Chargers will be playing internationally in 2025.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers.
We do have to talk about the news of the day first, because we did find out officially now that the Chargers will be playing in Brazil. The NFL announced on Wednesday that the Chargers will be opening their season in Brazil week 1, September 5th in Sao Paulo at the Arena Corinthians. And that's exciting, David. It's exciting to get the big stage to start off the season the first weekend, just like the Eagles and the Eagles and the Packers did in week 1 this year. And guess what? The winner of the game in Brazil wins the Super Bowl 100% of the time, according to my numbers. But it is exciting. There's some pros and some cons to it, but I think to kind of have the chance week 1 on the global stage, not just to build your own fan base and, cater to the fans that you have internationally and specifically in Brazil, but also to platform how much better you are from the season before, right? And I think they're probably going to get a good opponent to do that. And I think with this game, there is a lot of excitement around it.
There really is. And the NFL is not going to just pick any team to put on the world stage. They're not just going to pick the Browns, or they're not going to pick the Jets.
Jaguars, yeah.
They're not going to pick the Jaguars. They're going to pick a team that's exciting, that plays a brand of football that you want to watch, that wins, that was just in the playoffs. Obviously, the Chargers definitely fit that billing. So I'm very excited to see it. Obviously, I hope this time the field is in much better condition than it was when the Eagles and Packers played. But this is a big thing. I know it's a little, unfortunate for, the home fans who lose a home game. And I know that's never ideal. But I see this as a way of growing the Chargers fan base and getting more fans from around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel for the season ticket holders, like you talked about. I mean, it does hurt the Chargers in the sense that they are losing a home game. Now with 17 games, you're alternating how many home games you get per season. The Chargers had 8 last year, and basically they'll have 8 this year. I would say it's good news that there are going to be a lot of teams playing internationally this year. Not all of them get to play in week 1, where you have a built-in bye week right before that, and you're coming off of, you should be fully healthy, which is great. The other part of it is you're playing on a Friday night, which means you get an additional 2 days of rest after that before you have to play your next game at least. So I think all of those things play into the Chargers' favor. Now, we saw the field conditions last year, and you have to hope that they learned from that, because obviously with a game like this, you wonder, why do they do this? And it always comes down to the same thing. It's for money, right?
Of course.
Hopefully they field a better product this time around, because you kind of always have to wonder whether or not they really care about that kind of stuff, and we'll find out that first game. But the second question is, who are they going to play, right? Yeah. And I think when you're looking at the teams they could play this year, I don't think it'll be a divisional game, so I would rule that out. The Steelers are going to be playing in Dublin this year. The Colts are playing in Germany, so I'd rule those teams out too. I'd also rule out the bad teams. The teams that make the most sense are the Texans or the Commanders. Obviously, the Texans just blew out the Chargers in the playoffs, so maybe they're not trying to rematch that. Maybe they are. But it seems like the one that most likely would tickle the NFL's fancy the most would be the Commanders. Daniels versus Herbert to open up the season. I think that would be the best matchup and an exciting matchup as far as the teams that realistically could be that team.
Yeah, I mean, hey, 2 Super Bowl teams, 2 teams from each conference, 2 really young and exciting quarterbacks, and 2 teams that look like they're really ascending. They're really heading in the right direction. So, yeah, this is definitely the type of game, the type of product that the NFL wants to put on the world stage to try to grow the game of football.
Absolutely. And I mean, I just remember, LeBron last year tweeting during the game, man, this field sucks. Saquon Barkley loses 5 yards on the first play from scrimmage. And also, the thing you worry most about, Jordan Love got hurt at the end of that game on that field. But we still have more that we want to get into today. And since we had this news, we did want to fill it in with some Chargers mailbag questions, including this one, who's from Ricardo from Brazil. I listen to the podcast every day, and I'm excited about the Chargers opening the season here. I hope I can buy a ticket. What can we expect from the defense in Jesse Minter's second year? I understand one advantage was having several members who played well in the secondary, but none of them, with the exception of James, have the appearance of being a superstar. Do you think this logic will continue in the construction of the roster for next season? So, David, a lot to unpack there, and obviously, to a certain extent, we'll need to see what this defense looks like, because, hey, you lose a Poona Ford, and a Khalil Mack and don't maybe make all these additions to it, it'll be pretty questionable about what that unit is going to be able to produce. You could throw Elijah Molden in there as well because he wasn't a star, but he was really, really good on the back end of this defense. And I don't necessarily think the Chargers don't want stars, right? In the secondary, I think Derwin James just happens to be the only one there right now. Tarheeb still a guy that we both love a lot. Maybe he can turn into that. You have other players on the defense, maybe Deion Henley, right? We'll see if you can bring back a star like Khalil Mack. But I do think there is something to getting guys that fit, getting guys that you think will work well in the secondary, maybe more than going after star players. But we haven't actually seen GM Joe Ortiz have the flexibility to go after a star cornerback in free agency or spend premium resources on that. So I guess we could find out pretty soon here if the Chargers feel like they need another star in that secondary next to Derwin James.
Well, they are probably going to be losing a couple of corners. I mean, Christian Fulton, Asante Samuel Jr., guys that, very well could be gone in free agency and looking for other teams. And yes, the Chargers have an abundance of money, and they just put out the salary cap projections where it could be over $280 million for the salary cap. So it could be even more money for the Chargers to be able to utilize. And yeah, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see what Joe Ortiz is going to be able to do with all of those resources after doing so well with such limited resources. Now it's almost an even bigger challenge to see how he's going to allocate the resources that he has now that he's not so cash strapped.
And I think if you're the Chargers and you have the history of kind of striking out in recent memory on these big time free agents, it can be a little bit scary. And you don't want J.C. Jackson walking through those doors, but you do have two cheap corners who you just spent 5th round picks on in Cam Hart and Tarheeb still that are a great foundation to where if you have to pay a top corner, for 3 years, that only one of those 3 spots that you're using consistently, the nickel and the 2 outside corners, you're not going to be paying very much collectively for that group. So I'd understand if they want to go add a veteran. It'll just be about how much they spend on that veteran. And I think the thing at safety is you have Alohi Gilman, and maybe his status on this team is in question a little bit. We'll see, because they really have no depth there. It's basically just Derwin James and Alohi Gilman right now.
Yeah.
We'll see. That's a position that feels like it has to be addressed. Will they draft a young guy to go behind them? Can they bring back Elijah Molden? Those are very big question marks on this defense going into 2025. But what I will say is this. When it comes to Jesse Minter and what my expectations are for his second year, it isn't that they're going to be a top 5 scoring defense. We'll see. Maybe, I'll feel good about this defense at some point. It's going to be a really tough schedule with, I believe, 9 playoff teams on their schedule from last season. I expect Jesse Minter to get more out of the sum of its parts. I expect him to play to his players' strengths. And that was one of the things we talked to Tony Jefferson about, right? Like, a lot of coaches say they're going to play to your strengths, but this guy actually does it. And I think you can see it not just last year with the Chargers, but you saw it in his last year at Michigan too, where they didn't have highly touted edge rushers. What they did have was a super dominant interior, and they built their defense off of that and some good corners. Last year, they didn't have dominant interior guys, right? It was a much different team than what their strengths were when he was at Michigan, and they still found a way to have the top defense in the league. So putting numbers on it, I'm not ready to do yet, but I do expect for Jesse Minter to get the most out of the players out there. And I think there was a lot of guys who really stepped up their game or returned to great form last year with Jesse Minter leading the way.
When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love FanDuel's live betting features because every moment is exciting. When I follow my team on a late-game rally, when the player I picked hits a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. The NBA back in action, and now is a great time to get in on some late-night lines. The Suns, 2-point favorites on the road against the Spurs and the Lakers. 4-point favorites in Portland. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
The 2025 NFL salary cap is basically like the price of eggs across the country. It's going all the way up.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast.
By way of Twitter, saw it from Dan Graziano from ESPN. He tweeted out, the NFL today informed teams that the 2025 per team salary cap will fall in the range of $277.5 million to $281.5 million, way up from last year's $255.25 million cap, and it will have increased by more than $53 million over the last 2 years. Woo, that's a lot of money. Now, look, it's not set completely yet. It's not exactly what the number is, but it's going to be anywhere in that range. So it's basically going to be at least a $20 million increase. And look, teams aren't super shocked. They're already kind of estimating what they believe it's going to be, but I don't think many people thought it was going to be at least $277.5 million. That is a lot of money on the salary cap just to continue to go up. And it's so funny. We talk every year like, well, you can't pay everyone. You can't get everyone under the salary cap. And I've said it for years. If you want to keep a guy on your team, you can. You can find ways to do it. We see teams always kick it down the can all the time, always manipulate the cap. And I know that a lot of people say that's a bad idea. It's like a credit card. Eventually, you got to pay it off. Do you? Do you really? I mean, not when it continues to grow like it is each and every year. And I know a team like the Saints, they're in salary cap jail right now. They're about $43 million in the red. But guess what? By the time it's all said and done and they got to be salary cap compliant, they will be. And they'll be able to be active during the offseason and free agency to what they need to do get done right about now. But it's not about the Saints. It's about the Raiders. So according to overthecap.com, and this is based off a estimation of the salary cap being $279.5 million. So it's kind of splitting the difference between 277 and 281. The Raiders have over $99.7 million in cap space and $92.9 in effective cap space. So they can obviously, that could be adjusted as well with a couple restructures like Christian Wilkins' deal, Minshew getting released, which I'm sure is going to happen. They could really end up being, when it's all said and done, close to $120 million in cap space. So where does that place them according to the rest of the league? Again, according to overthecap.com, second. It puts them second in cap space, only behind the Patriots, who currently have $126 million in cap space and $118 effective cap space. So the Raiders, John Spytek and company, have plenty of room to work with as they're trying to build this team this offseason. Now, I've always been one that said you don't build a team through free agency, but you can go out and make some smart acquisitions, right? Like I still think last year's acquisition of Christian Wilkins was a smart acquisition. Now, I know that he didn't play the full season. He got injured, so it doesn't look smart right now, but I think he's a difference maker. The Raiders can afford to go out and get a couple difference makers with that kind of salary cap space to help try to get this thing, speed this thing along when it comes to, getting this team where it needs to be. They also have Max Crosby. That's a scenario as well where they have to fix his contract as well. He's got 2 years left on his deal, but no guaranteed money. He's not going for that, so they've got to address that as well. So they've got wiggle room. That's the good thing. They already had wiggle room, but man, that's a lot of salary cap space. $99.7 million and $92.9 in effective cap space. So on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Wednesday, I had my guy Ari Mayrov from the 33rdteam.com, and this is just a portion of the conversation we had, but I asked him about the salary cap going up from where it was at 255.4 to at least 277.5 million, maybe even as high as 281.5. I asked him about the salary cap, Max Crosby's contract, and the Raiders not being for entertainment purposes only, not being an unserious team, but the fact that they've moved into the category of a serious team. Here's Ari Mayrov starting off talking about the salary cap and what he thought when he saw that number roll down.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big number, big jump. Obviously, every team benefits on it. I mean, every year it's funny to me to see how every team gets excited that they have more money to spend, which is all the other 31 teams also do. But it's way higher than most executives anticipated. The number that I was working with and what I heard from some people, whether they're negotiators or people on the financial side for teams, was 270 to 275. So this is going to go over that over here by at least $2.5 million, but potentially more if it reaches at 281.5, which is what the league sent out to teams today. So obviously that changes things over here when it comes to how teams are going to budget over here going into the offseason. The combine is next week. That's where a lot of these meetings officially get underway with agents. The franchise tag number is basically going to be set in stone over here once the final number is set. So the business of the year is officially going to pick up, and teams now have a good idea of what numbers they're working with. But it's a repeat of last year. If you remember, last year was a gigantic jump, even bigger than this year. It's a repeat again where we're getting a bigger jump than most people in the league expected.
How do you think John Spytek, the Raiders GM, how do you think he attacks this contract and tries to satisfy Max Crosby with something that's better than what he has right now?
Well, this is not only a John Spytek thing. It could also be a bit of a Max Crosby thing where this offseason is a bit of the offseason of the pass rushers, where we have a bunch of these guys who are not just the first-time extension guys like a Micah Parsons, but we have a lot of guys over here who are looking to get paid for a second time over here, and that is Max, and that's Myles Garrett, who could also be in the trade scenario. That is Trey Hendrickson. That is TJ Watt. All four of those guys are in need of new deals. So there could be a scenario here where it's going to be a bit of a staring match of who wants to go first and who wants to try to top that Nick Bosa number, if that's what they're aiming for, which, of course, right now is $34 million per year. So for Max's sake and the other three guys that I mentioned, there could be a scenario also where it's like, I don't know if I want to go right now. Let me first see how, TJ does or how Trey does or whoever wants to go first. And then from there, I'm going to try to top them. But it's definitely one of the priorities over here in Las Vegas. Of course, last year, they adjusted the deal by moving some money from future years into 2024. That obviously makes the rest of his contract look a little bit too, quote unquote, cheap for what he does on the field and where the pass rush market is. So it is something that has to be addressed over here at some point, whether it's continuing to do some raises over here to the current deal or trying to do a full-blown extension. That is yet to be determined. But I think it's pretty clear in listening to Pete Carroll and John Spytek that Max is a very big part of the future there, and they obviously would like to have him there long-term with a new deal.
I had a guest on the show last week say that the Raiders were a team that he would consider unserious up until this last offseason, and now the moves that they're making, he's putting them in the serious conversation. He said there's serious, unserious, and then there's for entertainment purposes only, and he called the Cowboys that entertainment purposes only, but he felt like that the moves that the Raiders are making, especially with Mark Davis and the new ownership, that's all part of it, the new cash that you talked about, they're in line to make serious moves. Do you consider them now a team that is in the serious category?
I mean, I don't think you go out there and make the changes that they did this offseason. Like, even firing Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco after 1 year, where some people were like, maybe they shouldn't have. And keep in mind, they're still paying Josh McDaniels. They're still now paying Antonio Pierce. Obviously now paying Pete Carroll. Like, there's a lot of money over here to former and current coaches and their staff out there. So a lot of teams look at Jerry Jones. He made sure Mike McCarthy's contract expired along with his entire staff before moving off of him. Teams would not do that because they care about the amount of money that they're spending on these other things. The Raiders are like, no, we are serious over here. We liked Antonio Pierce. We liked Tom Telesco, but we know we can do better. And they went out there and they brought in Pete. They were very serious about Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson initially, for what it's worth, had no interest in interviewing with the Raiders. He privately had his agent, Rick Smith, tell the Jets, the Saints, and Raiders, don't bother putting in a request for me because I don't want to embarrass you by saying no. The Jets and Saints didn't. The Raiders had Tom Brady get a call with him and Rick Smith, and he convinced them to do the interview. So there's a bit of a seriousness over here to the Raiders where we want to be competitors out there and be a team out here that could win and be a real team over here in the NFL. So they obviously didn't get Ben, but they were in there, and they, of course, ended up getting Pete and John and this entire coaching staff together, and a new personnel staff as well, which is also underway.
Ari Mayrov right there from the 33rdteam.com, and we had about a 20-minute conversation, no joke. It was a really good conversation. He's always great, does fantastic work. If you check him out on Twitter, he's at My Sports Update. He's always my go-to guy. I look forward to talking with him, and, again, I'm going to continue with this serious, unserious, and for entertainment purpose only theme when I talk to these people that I really respect to see where they look at the Raiders from their eyes. And you heard what Ari Mayrov had to say. So again, the Raiders are not out of the woods yet. They're not all of a sudden just slid into the category of the most serious team in the league, but to know that people are looking and observing and saying, you know what? I respect what they're doing. That is a good sign. They've got to keep it going. They got to keep this party rolling, but it's a good sign for sure. Also, and this will be the final nugget here for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, little news and notes of the day. It's funny, I saw from Pro Football Talk, they tweeted out, the Chiefs are not expected to franchise or transition tag their guard, Trey Smith. Smith has started all 80 regular season and playoffs games he's played since joining the Chiefs in the 6th round of the 2021 draft. It made him a key part of the protection for Patrick Mahomes as the team's right guard. Given the fact they need to improve that protection at left tackle this offseason, the prospect of losing another offensive lineman is not a good one for the Chiefs. So I saw that, and I've, seen that Trey Smith could or could not be available. And I've been one that I think that the Raiders really need to, this offseason, attack the offensive line, both in free agency and the draft. So I'd like them to solidify it. So I've kind of had my eye on Trey Smith, but I don't know all the nuts and bolts about him and everything that he's done all season long. So I tweeted out, the Raiders should have interest. Boy, I don't know why I tweeted that. Raider Nation came from my head. Man, everyone hit me with their penalties, the penalties he's been called for, penalties he didn't get called for. I had charts that were DM'd to me about why it was a bad idea, talked about the Super Bowl and what he wasn't able to do against a guy like Jalen Carter. So I quickly tweeted back, I stand corrected. My bad. My fault. So, again, I really just want to see the Raiders attack that offensive line and really build this thing the right way, right? Make those trenches solidified. Give the quarterback, whoever that ends up being, a chance. Give the running back a chance to actually run the rock consistently. I would love to see that. I felt like Trey Smith would be a good addition at the guard spot. I don't know if Dylan Parham is the guy that they're going to look at as a good solution there at that right guard spot. It feels like he's kind of, not worn out his welcome, but it feels like you've kind of seen what Dylan Parham's going to be, and I don't really know if it's what the team needs moving forward, especially with this new staff in place. So I thought it was a good idea. Raider Nation did not, and that's okay. I love the back and forth, and that's why I said, hey, you know what? You know better than me. You've got charts on this kind of stuff. You saw the penalties. I didn't really realize that. My bad. It's okay to say that every once in a while. Put your hand up and just say, hey, my bad. So I'm not going to suggest that the Raiders go after Trey Smith, but according to Pro Football Talk, he's not going to get franchise tagged or transition tagged. And maybe because everything the Raider Nation told me, maybe that's the reason why.